First of all, I want to get away from the dictionary definition of a constitution. A constitution must have purpose, and the purpose must be to create a nation that conduces to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Good day and welcome. I'm your host, Sasenarine Singh. I want to express my deep condolence to my brother, Sahaluddin Nazruddin, who could not be here at this time because of a personal tragedy. We're coming to you live from an internet platform powered from New York City with a live audience in Richmond Hill, Queens, technically managed from Mumbai, India, and with me, your host from Maryland, USA. We are inviting into our space three esteemed politicians of Guyana. With us today is Mr. Lennox Shuman, leader and presidential candidate of the Liberty and Justice Party, a newly formed party that was launched on January 2019, and he's connecting to us by way of Georgetown, Guyana. We also have Dr. David Hines, who is a professor at the Arizona State University, an executive member of the WPA, and a member of the APNU-AFC coalition team. Finally, we have Honorable Miss Gail Teixeira, former Member of Parliament and former Chief Whip of the People Progressive Party Civic, both while in government and as opposition, and executive member of the PPP and WPO, Guyana's largest women's organization, and former member in the PPP civic government and also a former presidential advisor. Welcome all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, Sis, and it's good to be here. But before we continue, I want to issue a correction. I think my name is misspelled. It is Lennox with one N. Maybe your technical guys could correct that.
Please, we will get that corrected immediately. Thank you very much for that, and we apologize. On that fateful night on December 21st, 2018, 33 of the 65 Member of Parliaments voted in accordance with Article 106 and Article 107 of the Guyana Constitution, causing the government of Guyana to fall. When called upon to reverse the decision of the National Assembly, the Speaker, Dr. Bartland Scott, declined the request from the APNU-AFC coalition and reiterated that the motion was, in his words, duly carried and accepted by himself and the majority of the MP in the National Assembly. When called upon in January to reverse his decision, the Speaker made it very clear. On this occasion, in his words, he said, and without further ado, I declined the invitation to act in the reversal. Some people saw it fit to disregard the Speaker's decision, and in this matter, they have asked the Court of Competent Jurisdiction to review the decision. Those court proceedings were launched, and the Chief Justice acting issued a landmark decision on January 31st, 2019, and she highlighted several key issues. One, in accordance with Article 155, no person who holds allegiance and obedience to a foreign power is qualified to be a member of the National Assembly. Two, the motion was duly and legitimately carried by the required majority, which was 33 elected members. Three, the request to stop the clock and stay the Speaker's ruling was denied. That meant the 90-day clock continued ticking and would have expired on March 20th, 2019, unless 2/3 of the National Assembly extended it. The Cabinet, and fourthly, she ruled, the Cabinet, including the President, shall resign upon the passage of a motion, which in law means must resign. However, the government continues to function until the 90 days, up until that period expired. And lastly, she ruled the government shall hold an elections within 3 months, and only if a 2/3 of the National Assembly extend that timeline. So that decision was appealed, and it reached to the highest court. It was appealed in the Court of Appeal of Guyana, and it was overturned. And then it was appealed again to the Caribbean Court of Justice. And on Tuesday, June 18, 2019, 5 days after the murder of Guyana's most famous son, Dr. Walter Rodney, who struggled for democracy, democracy in Guyana got a vital vitamin boost. The CCJ ruled that the no confidence motion passed in the National Assembly on December 21st, 2018 was lawfully and validly confirmed, and the government of Guyana has fallen. There is another ruling with regards to the chairman of the Elections Commission, but we will delve into that a bit later. So here we are, the day before another fateful day when the CCJ will be handing down their consequential orders, and some 95 days after Guyana should have had a new government, and 5 days since Guyana has now had an illegitimate regime in power. Let us begin. I want to start with Comrade Gail, and I'm going to go very basic. What next? What next for Guyana? What next for the PPP?
I think that we're at the crossroads, Jason. That is that as a country, we're faced with two choices. Is Guyana going to be a country that upholds the democracy and constitutional rule? Or is it going to be a country that has become a pariah state, not abiding with its constitution, not abiding with constitutional rule, and violating democratic norms? That's the choice the country is facing. The political leaders, in particular the president, the onus is on him. The courts have ruled. The legislature ruled 181 days ago that there had to be the 106 article. 106 was triggered, and 106.7 was triggered. 181 days within which the president has not named a date. The cabinet and president stood resigned, both stated by the High Court and repeated by the Caribbean Court of Justice. And 5 days since that ruling, and nothing has been done. The court also ruled on Patterson, the chairman of GCOM. In the last 5 days, Mr. Patterson remains ensconced in GCOM, and the president has done nothing to change that. What we have to be faced with is what are good faith efforts. I've seen writings by my friend Mr. David Hines and others about the onus being on both parties. But ultimately, it is the president who knew when the vote was passed in the no confidence motion that at some point he had to call elections. He went to the courts, and in our view, this was a delay mechanism, but he had a right to go to the court. The issue is that we had a right to go to the court too, and we did, just as he did on 2 occasions. And the attitude of the government since the ruling has been less inspiring and actually very disturbing. We need good faith at it. When you ask me, Says, what we need next, we need good faith efforts by the president of this country to advise Mr. Patterson to resign. He has to have good faith efforts to name a date for elections within 90 days of June the 18th, based on the CCJ ruling. Those two things were he to do, would certainly enhance the government's dedication or declared dedication to the Constitution, and will give some comfort to Guyanese that we're still within the democratic fold of countries. So that's my first next step.
Great. I want to extend that question evenly to Mr. Shuman, who's in Guyana. What next, Mr. Shuman?
Well, Sis, thank you. I think there are some key things absent in Guyana. Let's start with the leadership. I think the president has to show his leadership caliber this time and say whether or not we are going to move the country forward or just continue to languish in underdevelopment in this sense. I have to agree with Ms. Teixeira on some points, however I differ on this one, that the consequential orders are to be issued tomorrow and that should guide the next steps forward. And the need for the chairman to resign, I differ on that position because I think by virtue of the ruling that was handed down by the CCJ, there is no need for resignation. Basically, the court has submitted that resignation for him. I would suggest that at this point, like Mr. Teixeira said, there needs to be good faith. All we have done with all of this political maneuvering and everything else, we have divided and deeply ingrained this separatist ideology in a lot of people. When you look at what is happening in Guyana right now, people are getting so entrenched in their political position compared to a national position where we want to move forward. It is my hope that when the court issues that order tomorrow, that there is a deadline set for the appointment of a new GCOM chair. And from there, they're going to stipulate the time frame within which elections should be called or maybe just mandated. Now, what I want to say is very, very troubling is when I sit here and I look at ministers in themselves stating that Guyana is an independent state or an independent country, and we have our own independent laws and they're not going to respect the CCJ's ruling, I find those things very, very disturbing. Because what you intend on doing with those remarks is that if the CCJ mandates something that is best for Guyana, and it is not in line with you or what your supporters think, then it may start to incite violence. And I think that is one of the last roads. I wouldn't say the last roads, I ventured on that. For a democracy that is 53 years old, we should be way, way, way further down the road.
Okay, Dr. Hines, your take. What next for Guyana and what next for the coalition?
Well, what next is that the political process has to play itself out. The courts have spoken. The courts, three levels of our judicial system weighed in on this matter. Two of them came down on one side, one came down on the other side. And the courts have taken us to where we are now. As a holistic process, after the courts have made their ruling, it is now for the political process to kick in. I don't think the judicial system operates in a vacuum or in isolation from the larger process. And the courts have said this. The court said, CCJ said, we have made our ruling and we ask the two sides to come back to us with a happy marriage of principle and practicality. That is what I'm calling the political process. And so now I think the onus is on the two leaders to agree on the way forward, which would include when elections are going to be held. There are questions. One side is saying elections can be held in 60 to 90 days. The other side is saying elections cannot be held during that time period. They've got to negotiate and come to some consensus on the way forward. Courts generally do not like to direct another co-equal branch of government what to do. And I think our courts, the CCJ was very clear that it's reluctant to direct and issue ultimatums to another branch of government. So they've given the two leaders the opportunity to come to some consensus. We have a bad track record on that, and I think that's the major problem that we face. Can our leaders muster the maturity that is needed to bring the country forward into the 21st century, whereby differences are ironed out And then when that key moment comes, that our leaders can take a nationalist position. And I think that's where we are at the moment.
I want to ask you, because you used two keywords that one of the judges used: principle married with practicality.
Yeah.
Now, let's face the Guyana reality. I mean, Guyana's been here in the 1990 period. We've been here, I think it was the 2001 period. We've been here. So we have experience in this situation. The reality, though, is what has GCOM been doing since December 21st, 2018? Because it is not the government or the opposition or any political party to organize for an election. That's GCOM's work. What have they been doing since this vote was passed?
Well, we all know what they've been doing.
They're not prepared.
Yeah, we all know what they've been doing. We've been following what has been going on at GCOM. Unfortunately, Guyana does not have a non-partisan elections commission. That is the main problem here. We have a partisan elections commission where 3 commissioners represent one side of the political divide. 3 commissioners are on the other side. And then we have a chairman. Invariably, our chairperson of GCOM has come down on one side or the other. So what we have is a political elections commission. And that's the problem. And my point here is that we cannot ignore the realities of Guyana. My frustration with all this talk about the rule of law and constitutionality, we're talking as though there is not a real place called Guyana. And when you talk about rule of law and constitutionalism, you have to talk about it within the context of the reality that we face. We are a difficult nation. Guyana is not.
Can I come in here, sis?
Yes, of course.
Can I come in? But we each have to wait to be called on by you.
Let me finish.
Just guide me.
After Dr. Hines finish, I will open. Any one of you can rebut it.
Yeah, we're
I'm not sure if it's a dialogue or we have to wait for you to call us.
The British are the ones who give us this no confidence thing. And in Britain, before you get to no confidence, a prime minister would resign.
Okay.
They do not have to call on that device.
So that's very clear. You've made that clear that Guyana is a difficult country.
Yes.
Comrade Gail, what do you have to say?
I am tired of this beautiful nation that we've been born in called Guyana being derided all the time as if we're incapable, incompetent to deal with our situation as a people, regardless of ethnicity, religion, class, or gender. Constitutions play a role in democratic societies. There's a reason why there's a constitution. It guides the performance and behavior of the citizens of the country. That's why you have constitutions. Some countries don't have constitutions. We have. And it guides our behavior, our principles, what we stand for as a people. And we have fought hard to have a constitution that reflects in some way the way in which we want to behave. The 1999-2001 constitutional reform may not have been perfect, but it certainly brought in back what Burnham had removed in the independence constitution, and that was the no confidence motion. It put back in all the human rights as enshrined in the constitution that could operate on their own without going to a court of law for interpretation, for an act of parliament. The issue of the appointment of chairman of GCOM came out of the Carter
Price
formula.
Yeah.
Price formula. And it became constitutionalized in 1999-2001. And it came out of demands by APNU, well, at that time PNCR, WPA. If you read the commission reports, the submissions of the WPA and other parties was that, including our own party, and that was to have inclusive governance and to have a role for the leading opposition. We were in government. The view of the then opposition was it had no stake in the appointment of constitutional bodies. We included that. What is at stake now when Dr. Hines talks about political process? Before we get to the political process, Dr. Hines, we have to deal with the Constitution. The government has no choice but to obey the Constitution. The reason why we've had 6 months delay is because the government did not wish to obey the Constitution. The crossroads we are now at. When the president announces a date for the elections, when the president says the cabinet and himself are hereby resigned in accordance with the CCJ ruling, when the president says that the Patterson is no longer the chairman and kicks in the process for Mr. Jagdo and him to do his list, that's where the political process lies. The political process is not now. The political process is where the president, in good faith, I mean, if we read what the CCJ ruling is, if we go back to they posted on the CCJ website, they express a fear that the government, having not complied with the Constitution 106, 107, that it could do it again. Now, read the report.
Yeah.
And so this is a CCJ that says, look, guys, there was a no confidence motion, is valid. We moved it. It triggers 106, 107. This palaver about the CCJ consequential orders, it is our lawyers in the CCJ who asked for consequential orders.
Mr. Shuman,
I mean, this view that suddenly two leaders are going to get together and decide that the president's going to obey. The president has showed a reluctance for 6 months and 1 day to obey the Constitution.
Okay.
And now it is 5 days since the CCJ, and he's saying that you can't have elections because 200,000 are incorrect entries, and it has to be now held after the House-to-House registration. That is not an indication, Dr. Hines, of good faith. That is indication of bad faith, bad intentions, and thumbing your nose, not only the Constitution of our country, thumbing the nose of the CCJ, the highest court of our country.
Mr. Shuman, you're a representative of the third force in Guyana, so I hope you will bring a different thought set to this conversation. Let's hear you.
I'm sitting here listening to Mr. Teixeira, but I have to correct a perception that maybe a lot of people think that their party is free from sin, and I think. Let me go back to the Bible. The Bible says, "Let ye who has not."
What I'm trying to achieve here. Let's not worry.
Don't worry.
Are we getting into that kind of thing? I thought we're doing the Constitution.
Yeah, all I want to focus on is
this is the crux of the matter.
I know, but let me just make it very clear.
What's the crux of the matter? The crux of the matter is the Constitution.
I think most. Please, let the moderator make the point. The point is, Guyana spent too much time focusing on who did wrong and who did wrong. I am trying to get out of you three esteemed people how we can come to some solution. So, on that light, Mr. Shuman, you're on the floor.
But here's the thing, Sace. If you don't know history, you're bound to repeat it. And if you cannot understand the facts, you cannot present clearly on it. We're talking about what next, political maturity and all of these things, right? About the political process that is before us. Mm-hmm. But I go back to this, let ye who has not sinned cast the first stone. And the reality is both the PPP and the PNC have failed to adhere to the Constitution. I mean, my esteemed colleague on screen there might be one of them, but we've had people who would have looked at the Constitution with little regard. We have a Constitution that lacks teeth to a certain extent. We have a Human Rights Commission that is good in the Constitution, but never, ever established. So these are the things that we have to look at. And it is not only... What I'm getting at is not only confined to one single party, it is both parties. The issue that I think is absent from Guyana, and Dr. Hines is right, Guyana is a difficult place, but it is not because we have difficult people, it is because we have difficult politicians. I remember being PR'd to wit's end when I sat as the vice chair of the National Two Shows Council and wanted to have a dialogue with His Excellency on a way forward for Indigenous peoples. And he delayed us 2 years until such time as we were elected out of office. And then he chose more sympathetic minds to come and sit down and do a PR with them. And I think what is going to happen tomorrow with Dr. Jagdeo and the president, it is just a PR stunt. Good leadership would have said, look, the court is going to rule on such date or such and such date, whatever it is, and sit there and you say, look, why don't you come in, regardless of what the ruling is, and you're talking about political maturity, regardless of what the ruling is, let's sit down and find a way forward for the healing of this nation. But that has not existed. We have not seen the kind of leadership that exists in office of the president to execute these things in the nation's interest. You have to have some kind of foresight. Okay. Whatever's going to happen tomorrow, I'm sure that there isn't a meeting planned after consequential orders are given again. So it's just
after. Mr. Shuman's right. The letter says after June the 24th for the meeting, not on the 24th.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that let us agree. We are just 4 voices, but there are a whole host. There are actually over 1,000 people watching this show right now. And there is a question that comes up from one of them. Sonia Morris from Guyana, good faith by both sides. When Patterson resigned, wouldn't elections be further delayed since a new chairman has to be found? That is a question from Sonia Morrison. Anyone can jump in first and then,
Permit me to take that first, please. As I said before, Mr. Patterson need not submit a resignation. The court has submitted that resignation for him when they said that his appointment was not in line with the law. So I don't think that there is a need to go through that process again. What should have happened...
But her fear is it might take... How long did it take the last process to get a chairman? It took a while. Would it not cause...
14 months. It took 14
months.
Right.
So
here...
Cause further delay.
Says, but here's the thing, right? We're talking about political maturity and further delay. I understand that. And the viewer has the right to fear because there is a potential that the administration will do everything that they can to frustrate the system and prolong the system as long as they can, if not to November, maybe until 2020 or who knows how much further. That fear is real, and that is a fear that is felt by everyone in the streets of Guyana.
So what's the solution?
The solution
on a new chairman.
And this is where I was getting at with the consequential order, is that I would suggest, if the justices are listening or if the lawyers are listening, to maybe ask for a definitive date and a definitive mechanism in line with the Constitution that would satisfy that process. We cannot move ahead with a flawed process and expect we're going to get fair results in the end. The process right out of the gates, it has to be fair. It has to be in line with what the Constitution dictates. If not, when the elections are done, no one can sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to complain about rigging, I'm going to complain about statement of polls, I'm going to complain about what, I'm going to have to appeal this because I did not start off with the right process. Taking a little bit of a delay in my view, and in our party's view, it is not the worst thing to ensure that we get the appointment of the chairman right, that we have an objective and fair and centered chairman, and then we could move ahead with whatever else come behind as to what the courts are going to issue.
So we're going up the line, Miss Teixeira. The question that Sonia is asking, when Mr. Patterson resigned, but as we've just found out, he's been resigned. Wouldn't elections be delayed because we're now looking for a new chairman? This is from Sonia Morris.
Yes, I heard. I've been hearing. First of all, it's a technicality in terms of, yes, Mr. Patterson has resigned or is resigned. He's still occupying the office of the chairman of GCOM and he hasn't moved. And therefore, it might be nice to say that he's resigned, just like we're saying the government is illegal, but the president and cabinet have not resigned. Both courts, the High Court and the Caribbean Court of Justice, have both said the president and cabinet have stood resigned, obviously. So that is why we say the government's illegal. In relation to Ms. Morris' question, it's a good question, an important one, and that was why, Ms. Morris, we wanted to ask the court for consequential orders. That came up in the court in May 8th, 9th, and 10th about what if. And so you're right to ask that question. We believe on our side that we have put forward proposals. Our lawyers have put forward proposals to the government lawyers in relation to what happens tomorrow. I am not privy to what has been the response of the government except by their public pronouncements. But we have put up details as what Mr. Shuman and what you are seeking. The issue is that if we have said, Mr. Jagdew has said, that within a matter of hours, he can provide the list for Mr. President to look at, and we believe that that could be handled very quickly. And so we don't believe that it should take more than a few days, if not a week maximum, for the appointment of the chairman. In the meantime, if the president proclaims the date of elections in keeping with the CCJ, then the law and field and the chief, election staff can start preparing the machinery, because that's what the law gives them. And so when a commission comes in, they would then deal with the other issues. We need a claims and objection period, not a house-to-house registration. And so there are a number of things the chairman has to do, but the responsibilities at Lowenfield today, as of now, when I'm speaking, he can convene, as he did on December 22nd and 23rd, the technical staff of GCOM after the no confidence motion to start preparing for elections. The PRO announced on December 27th, we are ready to hold elections within the constitutional time. And then, of course, as you correctly said, partisan political maneuverings came in and machinations and shut down the GCOM staff from doing what they know they're supposed to do up to now.
Dr. Hines, the last time you and I were on the show, 37,000 people viewed your comments. So please respond to Sonia Morris' question. And our question is, when Patterson resigned, wouldn't election be delayed since a new chairman has to be found?
I think Sonia Morris has hit the nail on the head. We are in the presence of something that is complex, that we're trying to reduce to a simplistic thing. It's a very complex moment. It's a very complex process. We have two principles. We have the principle of adherence to what the Constitution says. If there is a vote of no confidence, a successful vote, it says elections must be held within 90 days. That is very clear, and that's a very important principle. But there is another important principle, which is that elections must be fair, must be seen to be fair, that all citizens must be given a chance to participate in those elections, that we should not sacrifice that democratic process for another process. It is both a sacrosanct. Adhering to the Constitution timeline is sacrosanct, but also making sure that all our citizens are allowed to participate in the process is also sacrosanct. So what we have are two very important democratic principles. And that is why I'm saying our leaders ought to get together and give us a timeline of how we are going to satisfy both. We have to have a balance between the two. It's not one or the other. That's my frustration with both sides. With both sides. Look, this issue is not about all this stuff about rule of law. This issue is about the voters list. That's what it has come down to. One side wants the present voters list. The other side does not want the present voters list. And the two leaders have to address that. All the other stuff that we're talking about, it's really ignoring the central issue. As I said in my column this morning, that the PPP need to stop hiding behind the constitutional timeline, and the APNU, AFC need to stop hiding behind GCOM timeline. And really,
is that a fair ask of the APNU and the PPP? And I'll tell you why. I mean, I keep hearing a lot about this list, but there's a couple of practicalities that we must consider. The list is controlled and managed by GCOM. And I know you said it's a political agency, but Mr. Granger is quoted as saying today we cannot proceed on the current list. It's outdated and corrupt. Yes. Well, he said that a few days ago. And my question is, how so? How is this list so corrupt and outdated? The reason being, if my memory serves me right, the National Registration Act, Chapter 1908, does define a methodology that is scientifically correct in how we update the list. And I recall that methodology was used only during the period May 21st to 2018 to July 15, 2018 to prepare this nation for the 2018 local government elections. So why could GCOM not use the same process since January 2019 and update this list so that this nation can have what it wants, an updated list? Mr. Granger will be satisfied that he has his updated list. The PPP will be satisfied. The third forces will be satisfied. The civil society will be satisfied. All of Guyana will be satisfied. So why is GCOM deliberately stalling? Dr. Hines.
I am not an expert on GCOM. I'm not in GCOM. I'm guided by our representative from GCOM, the WPA's representative, and he has informed us that there are serious problems with the list. I am not there. We have to go by what he's telling us. The PPP obviously has to go by what their representatives are telling us. What I am saying here, whether one side is correct that the list is tainted or it's incorrect, I have gone past that. What I am saying, there is an issue with the list. Both sides see the list differently. And when you have an impasse, you've got to find a solution. So I am not here trying to figure out which side is correct about the list. The fact of the matter is that they disagree on the list. And they have to, I think, to agree on what to do with that list. Are you going to have household registration? Are you going to have claims and objectives? These are issues that they have to agree on. And then they have to agree on a timeline to get those things done. So I am not getting into who's right about the list and who's wrong about the list. They differ on the list. And if they differ on the list, we can't move forward unless there is a solution.
All right, so Gail, and then Lennox respond, and then we have a caller on the line.
Yeah, I'm listening to Dr. Hines all the time, very carefully. And I have some questions for him. Why was it November 12th, 2018 local government elections? There was no problem with the list by any of the political parties that contested. Not one issue was sent to GCOM, not one issue was publicized in the newspapers. There was an issue to do with the candidates, the backers of the candidates that the AFC had for their candidates. It had to do with the list, it had to do with the backers on the list for the candidates in Moses Nagamutu's village and stuff like that. So why is it between the continuous registration process ended on July the 8th, 2018, Mr. Bulkan went to Parliament in October to extend the life of the list from 3 months to 6 months to April the 30th. Everyone supported it unanimously. Elections held, not a peep about the list being a problem. We come to December 21st, not a peep about the list being a problem. We go to court, January, no problem with the list. We go to court, the issue comes out on February the 9th, when GCOM says we need 148 days to do this election. No House to House. House to House starts after the no conference motion being debated. And the issue of the list. A claims and objection period can be held 3 weeks for persons who are eligible to vote. There's a difference between continuous registration because people are registered from the age of 14 up. The continuous registration is legal, then House to House is not legal. It isn't provided for in law. But people can be put on the list or taken off the list. No one has said, until the other day when the president said 200 incorrect entries. Where did he pull that from? From a magician's hat?
200,000.
No, he said 200. Yeah, thank you, 200,000. Yes, thank you for the correction. It's even worse than what I said. And so, the issue is, where did this come from? A magician's hat? He pulled a rabbit out of the hat?
So the list was good for November.
So the list was good up to November, was good to January, it was good to February. Then it became a problem. The problem, Dr. Hines, is not the issue of whether the list is clean or not. Right. The issue is a question of the government doesn't want to go to elections because it knows it's going to lose. And it wants to hang on to power by its fingernails. And that is what the government is doing now. It's hanging on by its fingernails to power, desperate. So the list is now the manufactured thing. I'll tell you something, Dr. Hines. You and I know each other, long time story. Long time story, brother, in Buxton and other places. You and I have a good record, and I don't want to spoil it on this program. But you and I can fight on politics. But the issue is that the list can be cleaned up. Let's just assume that there are fairs on both sides. Let's assume so. Yeah. We can have a 3 weeks claims objection. Across this whole country, you have offices already there. The parties can have their scrutineers that will be there watching everything as they are right now. You want to give each party 2 scrutineers each at each center? That's fine. Therefore, everybody who has, for some reason, been left out, they went across to Brazil, they were in Grenada, they were in Canada, and they are now back home, they could do it. The second issue I want to raise with you is why then, if you're so concerned about everybody being on the list, why is it that Mr. Alexander in the GCOM publicly has been saying that in the house registration, if Guyanese are abroad more than 3 months, they cannot be on the list? Isn't that disenfranchising people? Isn't that disenfranchising? If you're going to have a house to house. Third point is the house to house, no matter which way you twist it, can never be done between June and November. Never. It took 9 months the last time, in 2008, to go house to house, to go back to house, to go down Ardham Creek and village and mountains in the interior, you know, and that 9 months, that's just to finish the process. When you finish the process, those names have to be extracted and put on the national database. Then they have to be extracted for a voters list. Then you have to have a claims and objection still to check that house to house. You're talking about next year, September, we're having elections in this place? Absolutely out. It must not be tolerated.
Mr. Shuman, I got a
that's illegal. The government's been called illegal by no other than CCJ. My dear Hinds, you're an intelligent man. Don't let them get strung among by these people.
So let's hear from a member of the third force. Come on, Mr. Shuman. Let's defend your corner.
Let me go back to Dr. Hines' position here, right? I think I would like to bring it down to a bit more of a rudimentary issue, or maybe two of them. The first one being that...
By the way, we have a caller who's waiting on the line since...
okay.
Just continue and then... technician,
so the first one...
Shuman finish, please bring the caller on.
So the first one is that GCOM is a political tool. Whoever sits in government would potentially use that to do whatever they want, just as long as it continues to be politicized in that sense. It needs to operate with the utmost independence, and if it's going to operate independently, it cannot operate with political operatives on it. We have to ensure that that part is completely clear. The second part of it that I would like to draw attention to, it is not, there is one more after that, but the second component of that is that the government seems very, very unwilling to cede or to conceive any decision that is contrary to their position. If it does not support their position, then it is not right. I mean, look at what happened on December 21st, and look at where we are right now. Every single decision that was not made in line with what the government thinks is correct, they have protested it. When it comes to house-to-house registration, I would tell you when I was chief in that community, 2016, 2017, and the early parts of 2018, GCOM went into our community and registered every single person 14 years of age and over. Are you going to tell me now that GCOM did not execute their mandate properly? When we all go to the voting booth, what is it that we take? We take an identification card, or as the court would have struck it down, we could take our birth certificate with someone to help us, and we could identify in that sense. So the 200,000 magician's number, as Mr. Teixeira would put it, those people would not get to vote. Obviously, if you're dead, you cannot vote. What we have to do is to ensure that GCOM is depoliticized and these people operate with integrity. And I think once we do that, when I say integrity, I'm talking about independence too. And when we do that, then you are going to see a change in how elections are conducted in this country.
All right, going to a caller on the phone. Technician, please help us. Caller, you're on the air. Please say your name and where you're calling from. Caller, you're on the air. New York City.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please. State your question, sir.
Okay, this is Charles Sugam. How are you?
Hi, Charles. How are you?
Good. My question to the panelists is this, and I think we generalize too much, and we are not being specific with the consequential order. I had written a letter to the newspaper, and I suggested that the president and the opposition leader, they agreed to reappoint one of the former chairmen. I suggested Steve Surge-Bally. There is Mr. Singh, and there is another one
Singh.
Also.
Major General retired Joe Singh.
Right. So I'm saying because these guys are already au fait with the laws of the elections, it might be one of the recommendations that the government and the opposition can come together and recommend to the CCJ, this is what we want. Secondly, if they don't agree with that, I'm recommending also we put specific time when the president must appoint a chairman of the commission. So the opposition leader will submit a list of names to the president, and the president be given a specific time to select a person from that list. Thirdly, I'm also suggesting that one of the orders should be elections must be held. I had written then August 31st, but I think a more realistic situation will be that the election should be held before September the 30th. I just want to hear the final
thank you very much.
idea of those recommendations.
Thank you very much. So the first suggestion was that we go with people who actually have done the job, and there's two persons who have done the job. One is Dr. Steve Surjbali and Major General retired Joe Singh. Why not go for them? Because they already know the landscape of GCOM and they will get the job done quickly. Secondly, he's suggesting that the CCJ should order tomorrow that a specific timeline by which GCOM chairman should be in place. And thirdly, he's also suggesting that CCJ also order that the elections must be held by September 30th. Your comments. Let's start with Mr. Shuman, and we'll reverse the clock now.
All right, so that means I have a bit more time now, right?
Yes.
Well, I think the suggestions are very good, except that I would always go back to processes. If we follow a very legitimate and constitutional process, it doesn't matter. Then you could always go to the court. If we're just to come up with a gentleman's agreement, then what happens at the end of that? You are going to have, if someone feels disenfranchised, they are going to go to the court and then frustrate the entire system again. Yes, it is nice to sit down and have that, but please ensure that, if there's an agreement, I mean, Major General Joe Singh retired, his name was on one of those lists. And I had made the suggestion previously. I said what should happen is they come to an agreement where the leader of the opposition says, look, Mr. President, I have submitted these lists in the past. What I would encourage you is to take one and let's sit down and dialogue over that. One of the good things I like about the gentleman's suggestion is that Mr. Joe Singh's resume speaks for itself. He would have held the post previously. So in terms of getting acquainted with the portfolio and the work and all that stuff, that knowledge is already resident there. So we don't have to go and reinvent the wheel if you're to take it that way. But I also remember when he parted ways with OP, when the government said, well, basically, he is not fit and proper. He said it's a work in contravention, so he could not work.
He's a principled man. That's what
exactly. So if he would have taken that position in the past, whether or not he would be willing to do that now, you have to remember the next GCOM chairman, whoever that is, or chairperson in this sense, whoever that person is, they are going to be looked at with excessive amount of scrutiny. Look at what is happening in Guyana right now. You cannot afford to put a full stop out of place or punctuation out of place in this system. If you do that,
but I want to remind you of history, because you told me about history earlier. In 1992, Guyana rose to the challenge with Rudy Collins. We found someone who was able to deliver free and fair elections for us, who was acceptable to then President of Guyana, Desmond Hoyt.
But Sis, I want to take you back. I've said it in the past, there have been two transformational leaders in Guyana's history. One of those was Desmond Hoyt. He is the person who gave us a democracy, regardless of what other people's perception of him is. He is the person who gave us a democracy of free and fair elections. And he was a principled man. He exercised all those things and showed political maturity and leadership. Those are the things that are absent today.
Okay, so what about the last question? He said the CCJ order must be held, should order that elections must be held by September 30th. What is your thoughts?
Well, once again, that is something that the leader of the opposition and the government will have to sit down there, at least their representative.
Well, they're not talking. The CCJ did give the political players an option, and they're not talking. So the CCJ has made it very clear, come tomorrow, they will make orders, consequential orders.
Absolutely.
So that is the way it's going.
Absolutely. And I would suggest that after they set, as I said previously, after they set a time frame for when they're going to address the GCOM chairman's appointment, then they set another time frame from that date on when elections have to be held. We know that it may become a bit difficult for lack of political maturity to have it done within 90 days of the previous ruling.
I don't know if that's accurate, because India just held an election for 900 million people, and their GCOM, their equivalent of GCOM, was able to set up in 1 month, 30 days, ready for 900 million people. A little 750,000 people or 500,000 voters list. It is ridiculous how GCOM is performing. It actually makes us. I was listening to a conversation on the Grenada radio station the other day, and I felt so wrong when those people said, I want to go on there, Guyana. They're just totally sick and tired that we cannot do a basic elementary thing as holding an election for 500,000 people. It's a joke. But moving on to Comrade Gail. Charles has asked 3 questions.
Yeah, let me start with the last one first, and that's the September 30th. I had said before, and I'm not sure if it was heard, that the court asked the legal teams, didn't ask the political parties. You read the language of the Caribbean Court of Justice. They never asked the political parties to meet. They asked for the parties to the court to exchange arguments, meet, and see if they could find consensus and come back to the court, failing which the court will rule. So I just want to correct that. Okay. There was no issue about leader of the opposition and PVP meeting. It was never there. So it was to do with the legal teams, and we said that we had shared our proposals with the government legal team on the weekend. The issue of the 90 days is when you're starting the 90 days, because as far as we're concerned, the court ruled on June the 18th that the government stood resigned. So June the 18th, 90 days hence, is September, if my calculations are right by Google, and that is September the 16th, 2019. You could double check that for me. So that's 90 days. We've already lost some days.
5 days. We've lost 5 days already.
Yeah, exactly. So 90 days. If it is that the president, this is where the political part comes in, Dr. Hines. If the president says he wants another date, or he doesn't want to call a date within that time, he's got to trigger the issue of a date. We can't pull a date out of our heads in the opposition. We are going with what the Constitution says, within 90 days. It is the president who says, I don't like 90 days. I want X date. And he has to call the leading opposition, because he will require the 2/3 majority vote in the parliament to extend the life of an illegal government, a government that's already legal.
So basically you're saying the ball is in Mr. Granger's court.
There's no other body court except Granger Court right now, and he's hanging on by his fingernails because he knows what he has to do. He can't tell me. I felt ashamed when I read that he said that someone has to advise him, the court has to advise him how his appointment of Patterson was flawed. Well, read the report now. I mean, it
is all there. It is actually all there. I read it.
To the other issue of the chairman, 18 names were put forward. Joe Singh's name was on the list as a very viable, respected candidate. Clearly, they were in the 18 names. The president, by rejecting one after the other, declared that none of the 18 were fit and proper. I would find it difficult to imagine that Joe, having been publicly embarrassed by no less than the president of a country, may want to consider being reconsidered. But that's for him personally. The issue, though, is that the names that we have on our list, we have said very clearly, we are prepared to present our list of names to the president within hours of him requesting those names. There are persons on the list that may decide in the meantime they don't want to go forward. There are other people who would say, look, I was in the court case, I can't any longer be on the list. People like Christopher Ram were on the list, etc. They may want to not be on the list. But we can put forward a list of 6 names within a short period of time. The court also made it very clear that the president couldn't make up his own criteria of what was the eligibility of the person. He made it very clear. the Constitution says judge, retired judge, or any other fit and proper person. He didn't talk about all sorts of other qualifications which Mr. Granger introduced subsequently at the second list. So that I think that I personally have no problems with people like Joe Singh being considered. That's on our list. He was considered in all the stakeholder meetings we had with civil society. Mr. Shuman, I believe, as part of the National Two Champs Council, was part of that whole consultation with national stakeholders. The first time the leading opposition in this country went beyond the parliamentary parties to consult civil society on those 18 names. So it wasn't a slap in the PPP in the face. It was a slap in the face of all the civic-minded people, NGOs, civil society, who came up with names. When a consultant come back with names, there were 60-odd names and they had to be proved down. People said no, etc. So I have no beef to give that, because I believe that Mr. Granger, by rejecting an honorable man like Joe Singh, is going to have problems eating crow and going back and appointing him. So I think these things have to be thought out. The main issue, we have a list, we're ready. Mr. Granger tells us he wants to see us in a matter of hours, we can see.
So it's
we
Sunday,
do not want to delay the process at all.
Sunday, June 23rd, it's now 3:24. We continue the conversation with Dr. David Hines answering the question from Charles Sugrim. 3 questions, Dr. Hines. If you need me to repeat them, I will. But over to you.
Mr. Sugrim made some reasonable suggestions. I wasn't sure whether he was talking about appointing one of the past chairpersons as in an interim capacity or not. I would have no problems with that. In terms of the timeline, I do agree with Mr. Sugrim that the 2 leaders need to set a compromise timeline, a consensus timeline. I continue to stress that. And I want to go back to what I started out by saying. We live in a real place called Guyana. All that we're talking about here is in relation to a real place called Guyana. Just in case we have not noticed, Guyana is again at the crossroads. Comrade Gail said that at the beginning. We are at an impasse. We are in the presence from the time that no confidence vote was taken in December. We entered into a heightened Cold War that could become hot tomorrow. I'm saying all these things to say that we can hold on to our dogmatic positions. And I suspect both sides are holding on to their dogmatic positions. At the end of the day, we've got to respond to the environment in front of us. We are at a political crossroads again. We were there in 1992. Carter helped us broker an agreement. We were there again in 1997. These 3 wise men came and helped us broker. I'm submitting to the viewers of this program that we are there again. The court has brought us to a place. It is now up to Guyanese and our leaders to take us beyond where the court has brought us.
But is that fair?
Let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish, please. I want to suggest practically that we give a 6 months timeline. One side is saying 3 months, maybe the other side is saying infinity. I want to suggest here that we have a 6 months timeline. All that they need to do, whether it's claims and objections, whether it's house registration, whether it's finding a new chairman, you say to them you have 6 months to do all of that stuff. And we have elections in 6 months. That's a political compromise that is not outside of the court ruling. And I'm saying the court has made its ruling. The government has to go. But there are consequences to that ruling. And we have to deal with those consequences in a very serious and mature way. So I want to suggest that the 2 leaders agree on a timeline. I say 6 months.
Okay, Dr. Hines.
6 months.
But
and all that you have to do, you do in those 6 months, and we have elections in 6 months.
Isn't it insanity?
Hold on, let me finish. Let me finish. I do not think an extra 3 months would amount to delaying tactics. I don't think an extra 3 months would give the government in place some extra big advantage. All they will have is probably 3 months more to do what they're doing and so on. And
Dr.
so
Hines, you said
but
you live in a real place.
Let me finish.
No, but you've been on there for a while now. You need to let us move on.
No, but you give the
All right,
others
go on.
man.
All right.
Give me my time, no man.
All right. Go on.
You know, I think an extra 3 months will not be flying in the face of the rule of law. I think it is reasonable. It's a marrying of the stipulations in the Constitution with the realities of what are before us. Comrade Gail posted a few questions to me. With your permission, can I answer?
Please press on.
Hey, Comrade Gail, what has changed since the local government elections is that the government was voted out by a no confidence motion. The stakes have become high. The political reality has changed. And so while they would have agreed and had no problems with a list for a local government election, the political reality is the political stakes have now risen. That has changed everything. What I'm saying here is that there is the technical, there is the moral, there is the constitutional, but there is also the political reality that there is a place called Guyana that has always, whenever we meet these points, they've always been on the edge. And we have to find a way to pull back from the edge. And we're not going to pull back from the edge with one side saying, you've got to do it in 90 days, and the other side saying, you've got to do it by G-Come-Way. We're going to pull back from the edge when the two sides sit down and they look at the reality and say, let's come to
let me just ask a question, because the point is Dr. Hines keeps saying Guyana is a real place, but the point is also the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. Guyana has done this in 1990 and the 1992 process. Guyana has done this, as you said, where we did in 1997, the Three Wise Men. We have done this. We have been here. We have done it. Why are we here again? Are we a group of insane people?
Says history has dealt us that hand, and we've got to work it through. We cannot pretend that Guyana is a place that is what it's not. This is what history has dealt us. It has brought ethnic groups in this place at different times, in different circumstances, and we are here in the culmination of that history. And we've got to recognize that and try to work it through. And we're only going to work it through compromise and consensus.
How many chances does nature give us to get it right? I mean, it tells me that the way the Caribbean is looking at us. I want to give.
Unless you want us to dissolve us, a nation.
No, but why can't we operate like Jamaica or Trinidad or Trinidad? Why can't we operate like Trinidad and
Trinidad
respect
is no different from us.
Principles? Anyway, Lennox is on the floor. He wanted to do a rebut.
Yeah, give me a 30 seconds here. I agree with Dr. Hines to a point where people are reverting back into their dogmatic positions. But then we have to look at the reality on the ground. When you have a government that is unwilling to accept a ruling that is not in line with what they had planned, they have been unseated. And the very fact that the Minister of State says that Guyana does not have to respect the state's, the CCJ's ruling, we should look at that as nation. Do we want these kinds of in government? I mean, I'd hate to sound like I'm politicizing this discussion. I mean, to a certain extent it is. But do we want to continue down that path where you've got these ministers of government who are taking those hardline positions? If you want to de-escalate the situation, why not sit there before you come out and say, well, no house, no election, no this, no that, 90 days, whatever? Why not, before you go out and make those statements, sit down and once again, the political maturity has to prevail. Have a dialogue between the two leaders and say, look, this is our party's position. This is our party's position. This is what the Constitution says. And this is how we are going to have to move forward to satisfy the Constitution. Dr. Hines, whether it is a mythical place or it is a real place, at the end of the day, the rule of law has to prevail.
But
It doesn't matter even, I'm sure.
But the rule of law has to be construed within the context of the dynamics of the society.
No.
I'm struggling.
There's a reason why we have a constitution. This government said it came into office saying it would have constitutional reform.
All right, one at a time.
Never had constitutional reform.
One at a time. Let's hear Dr. Hines a little bit more. Let's hear Dr. Hines.
I try to avoid speaking for the government because I can't speak for the government. And so what I'm giving you is my position. It may approximate sometimes in the WPA position. I don't want to speak for the government, all right? And I don't want to cast stones at anyone. But we forget that only a few years ago, the PPP was faced with the same no confidence vote. And it used the same tactic. It closed down the parliament. It refused to allow.
Just 1 second, you'll get a chance, Gail.
It refused to allow the debate. It used the same kind of tactics that this present government is using. But we demonize one and forget that the other one did the same thing just recently.
Gail, respond.
But can I answer that? Because I think it's a fallacy. First of all,
ought not to do that.
No, there's no similarity between the two, Dr. Hines, and you're too intelligent to know that that's not so. The issue is that Mr. Ramatar, as the president, acted within the Constitution. Whether people like what he did or not is a different issue.
Yeah.
There was a no confidence motion tabled. It was August the 7th, Parliament was in recess. The president prorogued Parliament. The Constitution gives him 4 months after that to dissolve. He dissolved Parliament, and we had elections within 72 days after the proclamation. So that we had, in the last several years, you had elections being held 47 days, 32 days, 62 days, 72 days after the proclamation of the date of the election. So we can do it as a people. This thing about somehow we can't do these things. We've done it, and we can do it again. It is the issue of the political will of the president of this country. There's no comparison. What Ramatar did was not unconstitutional. However, what he did do was recognize that a no confidence motion sitting in Parliament, it was not tabled as yet, it wasn't on the order papers yet, that he was prepared to face the electorate. He took a risk. He faced the electorate, and the PEP lost government by 1 seat. This government, faced with a no confidence motion, we had to wait for over, 6 weeks for it to be debated in the House. They could have gone, Granger could have gone the same route as Ramatar, and he would not have been breaking the Constitution. He would not have been in breach of the Constitution. But what he did, vote went through, it was voted majority, they went through the legal process. They have been defeated twice in the legal process, twice in the Parliament, and dug their heels in and refused to do anything. That's the difference. Ramatar did not disobey the Constitution. Mr. Granger is disobeying and in breach of the Constitution.
Let's dial down a bit now.
After December, they reached for judicial review. That is their right.
We're not debating that. I am not debating that. I am not debating that. I am not debating that.
I didn't want to defend this government.
No.
But 1 second. You cannot demonize one side.
All right.
Let the other side
out. All right, Dr. Hines. When I gave you brought up 2014, and I showed you that you're wrong. You're wrong about 2014. Absolutely wrong. Don't now divert into something else. I'm not dealing with judicial review. The High Court of this country on January the 31st, right, Stace? 31st? On January the 31st, you're telling me about judicial review. January 31st, the High Court of this country ruled no confidence motion valid, 33 valid. Charandas motion vote valid, and the government said no. They went to the court for judicial review, and because the answer wasn't in their favor, they went back for judicial review, and they said that if the Court of Appeal did not rule in their favor, they were going to go to the CCJ.
It is 3:37 on Sunday, and we just have the tea time now.
Is it not within the right to do
You're
that?
distracting. You throwing red herring in this
ladies and
podcast.
gentlemen,
You throwing red herrings out all the time. The
please
issue
allow
you
me
don't
to
want to
make
deal
an
with
announcement.
is that the Constitution is being breached by the highest person in this land.
All right, all right. Can we please pause? It's now 3:38. It's tea time in this cricket match. Excellent match. Excellent match. But we're not leaving yet. It's just tea time. The day is not over. I just want to announce this forum is coming by the kind compliments of Mr. Nohar Singh and Globespan 27. Guys, excellent debate. And I know you all love each other because we are a Guyanese family. We can quarrel, but at the end of the day, I know every one of you on this show and those who are listening wants the best for Guyana. So on that note, let's dial down the tone a little bit. But let me explain the process for the Guyanese nation. All Guyanese 18 years and older can be afforded an opportunity historically by way of claims of objection period over a 4 to 6 weeks period. The reality of that period is that it ensures that everyone who's 18 years and older can and will get on the list if they so want to. So updating the list can be done within that period. It's been proven historically, as Dr. Hines has said. We've done it before. Mr. Teixeira said we've done it before. We have done it before as a nation. We can rise to this and fix this. The question is, why are we not fixing it? Mr. Shuman first.
Says the very issue at hand here, it is not about disenfranchising people. We have to realize the reality on the ground is that the government failed the young people of this nation. The government failed to address their needs, it failed to address their issues. And what they're trying to do right now is take the political opportunity to say that they are trying to take care of the young people and ensure that their voices are heard. That is absolute baloney. They have no interest in the young people. What they have interest in is to try to hold on to power by any means that they see fit, that they could think of. And now they're saying that if there is no house-to-house registration again, that they are going to go to the courts. So what does that mean? They're willing to drag this on to the point where we may have to revert right back, if we're not there already, right into a dictatorship. We have to be real about what we are looking at. Whether we go for house to house, which is going to take 9 months to a year, you are going to find half of the population are going to be disenchanted with that process. There is also the vital component of protection of states' resources. Is the government trying to tell me that they need another 6 months to go and do ministerial outreach to try to mend systems that they never developed? Are you trying to tell me that they're going to go and take from the state's coffers to go and campaign because they have failed the people and could not do what needed to be done in their tenure? These are some real things that the Guyanese people have to understand. It is not about disenfranchised young people. It is that we have failed the people, so we're going to try to find a political tool that we could wield and say, you know what, we're looking out for the young people. That is it. It is as simple as that.
Okay, Dr. Hines?
Well, my two colleagues obviously are partly campaigning against the government. Right? I am in the position that I am not campaigning. I recognize that this is part. But your question is, why haven't we fixed it? And we haven't fixed it because we are yet to mature as a cohesive nation. You see, we go and we come. There are moments when we get there and then we squander the opportunity. You know, one of my criticisms of this government, and I have plenty, one of my criticisms of this government is that in May 2015, they got an opportunity to rise above the ordinary in terms of seizing that moment, that little window that was open there, to seize that moment and to do something transformative. And they failed to do so. Often, it's not often in these societies that you get an opportunity to do transformative things, because we are so locked into this partisan/ethnic competition for power that even when we're talking common sense, like the rule of law or constitutionalism, it's tainted with this partisan lens. And that is what has been holding us back. If we can find a way to solve our ethno-political problems, to say, yes, we have a partisan and ethnic positions, but that this nation is larger than those things, to find a way. And that calls for transformative leadership. And I dare say, it is my considered view that once the founding fathers, the Jagans and Burnhams and others left the stage, the opportunity for transformation has become less and less, because we have generations of leaders who are far removed from the notion of what independence for Guyana and the Caribbean should be. And it comes down to fighting each other for political power. Oil is coming, and we want our party to be the ones who will preside over that oil. That is the moment we're in. We are not about transformation of Guyana, and that is why we cannot fix basic problems.
Comrade Gail?
When I listen to Dr. Hines, I wonder why we have a constitution at all. Because why you have constitutions and why you keep them there is to make sure that we all have some framework within which we operate and we obey. When political parties can't be opportunistic or cavalier in their behavior. So when you have a constitution that says elections shall be held within 30 days, 90 days, that's Article 61, has nothing to do with a no confidence motion. So the Constitution of Guyana says that President, after appointing a date for proclamation, after he proclaims the election date, 3 months hence, elections must be held within that 3 months. The 3 months is not a fiction that came out for no confidence motion. So this idea that we could sit and negotiate and we can play with the Constitution and say, oh, no. 181 days have gone by. But we could give them another 180 days. Let's go to Parliament and give the 2/3. It's a slap in the face of why I have a Constitution. And maybe that is why the government has been totally uninterested in dealing with constitutional reform, which was one of their promises in 2015. So if the Constitution is flawed, you don't want no confidence motion, you want to do what Burnham did in the 1980 Constitution, take out the no confidence motion, then they could have had the constitutional reform for the last 4 years. They've been reluctant to touch the Constitution. So when Shuman says certain things about what needs to be changed, they allowed for no opportunity for any changes, because having got in, they were quite happy to keep it the way it was. And so what we are faced with now, you'd say I'm campaigning. I'm not campaigning, my dear. Campaigning didn't start yet. When I'm saying it, and I want to call a spade, my whole life as Gail Teixeira, born Guyanese, has been dedicated to the struggle for democracy in this country. My whole life. And therefore, for me, at this age, at my more mature age, is that I am not going to allow anybody to come along after all those struggles in the 70s and 80s with Walter Rodney walking from Buxton to Georgetown, getting beat up, getting locked up, and everything else. Not only me, hundreds of people, House of Israel and everything else, rigged elections. And I'm going to sit now quietly and talk about, as if the plague is on both houses. In this case, the plague is not on both houses. The plague is on the APNU AFC, including the WPA, including the president. That I am not going to my whole life be fighting for democracy and having to repeat it over and over again. We talk about young people. What is the best gift that those of us of this generation, and David is a little younger than me, but, I'm not sure, what I'm saying is that the generation of my generation, older, who fought for democracy, what did we want? What is our legacy? To have left a democratic constitution, to enshrine our human rights, and to let that be tested, and let that be the legacy for our people. Why is it now, when we talk about young people, if this thing goes forward the way we think it may, where the government just thumbs its nose at everything and says, no elections, after house to house, after November, we are on the path of an authoritarian state. And it means the young people that everyone's so concerned about and talks so much about, whether they're Indian, Black, Amerindian, Portuguese, or Chinese, or mixed, will have to go through what my generation of young people had to fight for democracy all over again. And I am not prepared at this age as a PPP leader or a Guyanese to see us go down that road again. So, Mr. Hinds, if you think I'm campaigning for democracy. I'm campaigning for the Constitution to be protected by our people. And if the government is not prepared to go in that direction, it is the will of the people that will have to speak.
All right, we're going to switch
now. And so the people will have to speak, whether it is going to protest, march, and walk from Buxton to Georgetown. Walk the 14 miles that some of us did. So that the government knows they're going to listen to the people of this country.
Thank you, Comrade Gail. I'm going to switch to an in-house question in the town hall. I'm handing you over. Technician, please connect us. Devin.
Well, from Richmond Hill, I would like to ask the questions. Why can't we take a more simplistic approach? Let's first look at a timetable within a week or two to appoint the chairman of GCOM, and then we can talk about election date.
Okay, I'll start with Dr. Hines.
Yes, that I agree with the caller. I think the onus is on us to come up with a realistic timeline, and I am all for that. I think we've passed the Constitution story and all of that. We know who violate and who thumb the nose at the Constitution, but we have got to save this nation from itself in the coming months. And the way you do that is you reach for compromise. We have to come off our dogmatic position. Comrade Gail knows that we only got constitutional reform this last time around after people were in the streets and there was a political impasse. And it was out of that political impasse that we got constitutional reform. We didn't get constitutional reform because the PPP wanted it or the PNC wanted it. They're never interested, neither of them. And that's the reality. We got that constitutional reform because there was a political impasse. People were on the streets, and we brokered an agreement which included constitutional reform. Both of those parties are guilty of the sins that they accuse each other of. And that is the reality. They are the stumbling blocks to progress. They dig in their heels on this dogmatic position. They hide behind whether it's GCOM or whether it's the Constitution. And instead of saying, this is a reality that we've got to deal with, and we have to make compromises, consensus. That is the only way forward.
Gail?
The caller's issue about 1 week, I think I gave that's what I proposed when I was speaking, that it was possible. I said it was impossible. It was possible for us to be able to overcome this issue of the chairman, and I believe maximum would be a week. And so I don't have to answer that aspect.
Mr. Shuman?
Once again,
is a week good enough for a new chairman?
Yeah, I think the caller was spot on there. If we set a time limit in that sense, but it has to go back to the legal teams from both sides to sit down and with their leaders and decide on what they're going to present to the court and look at the consequential order. I would suggest that 1 week is ample.
I think you're out of, like us, they're out of time. We got about 10 to 15 minutes more, but like us, I think that legal team is out of time. So we don't even need to go there. But I want to ask a bigger question, because it's called the tools of trade for democracy of Guyana. For democracy to survive in Guyana, we need a list that is updated. We need a chairman of GCOM, and then we need our constitutional or legal framework to carry out and conduct elections. So we are depending on the CCJ to actually, via these consequential orders, to literally, legally ring fence the way we should operate. I am hoping that from the political angle, the political players will come up with a chairman within a very short time, and the concept of a week seems to be making rational sense. And then there's the concept of the list, which historically we've been able to get cleaned in 6 to 8 weeks. Now, We did do house-to-house registration in 2008, and it is there that formed our baseline data. And it has been updated every year by way of continuous registration, which allowed all the 14-year-olds to join that database, whether they're Guyanese by birth, descent, naturalization, or citizenship of a Commonwealth country living in Guyana for more than a year. So the last time we've done this, as we said, is in July 2018, where all those 14-year-olds were brought onto the list. Now, let's pick sense from nonsense. Between July 2018 to July 2019, those 14-year-olds did not morph into be 18. A lot of them are still under 18. So it's only the 17-year-olds were morphed into 18-year-olds. So the question is, when Mr. Granger said those who have reached the age of 18 since the last elections are not on the voters list is suspect. And I want you to address, is it suspect? Am I feeling right by saying it is suspect that the president is saying the 18-year-olds are left off? Comrade Gail, and then Comrade Hinds, and then Lennox will close up.
You're saying Lennox is not a comrade?
No.
The list of 2015. The list of 2015 was a large list, over 500,000 voters. The list of 2018, 600,000 approximately. The government had no problem with the list. And in fact, although there was an election held before the 5-year period, that there was still a period of claims and objections that was held in that period before the elections in May. And that the list was high, the turnout was high in the APNU AFC areas, in the APNU areas in particular, of over 100%, in some cases 102% in some areas of the turnout of voters. So I'm kind of interested in mathematically, and if one just doesn't talk rhetoric, because I like facts. I like hardcore facts. I don't like just talking generally. Why is it the government is so perplexed now about persons not being on the list? Not only did they indicate there was no problem in 2016, 2018, but the fact was that if we look at the 2015 election results, they had over 100% turnout in some of their areas, most of their areas. So who was left out from this list? Because whoever was 15 in 2015 couldn't vote. That they may be able to vote now depending where their birthday drops based on a qualifying date, which is based on a date which we don't know of when elections are. So how do you deal with those things? The other issue is that I must respond, because I might not get a chance before we end, to just say to Dr. Hines, the constitutional reform process started in 1995 in the parliament, headed by Bernard DeSantis. The PNC at the time did not want to participate. Dr. Rupnarine was present there, and Clive Thomas. One of them were part of that committee. And then elections were called in 1997. It wasn't finished, and therefore it started. It was because of the elections of 1997, where the PPP won a larger vote than even 92, that triggered the constitutional reforms and coming back on this thing. But the records of 94 to 97, the PNC as a members of parliament, did not want constitutional reform. So constitutional reform was linked to what was a desire to be able to challenge the elections and whatever else that came along. So I won't go in that phase. But I think that really, to our listeners and so on, we have to look at the fact that this debate has to do with, in all political situations, there's somebody who has to bell the cat. There's somebody who has to lead the way. The courts have ruled, there's a consequential issues coming up. There's no leeway in the court ruling. Voter confidence valid, 33 valid, government, president, cabinet stood resigned, chairman, not valid. 4 things. So there's no wiggle room in that. What we're looking for consequential orders is to give us timelines, to give us some comfort that the trust issue, that the government will obey, the opposition will obey the court rulings. But one is having a very uncomfortable feeling between 2018 now, the government does not intend to go along with the CCJ. And that's where I said we have to put the onus where it belongs. We can talk about tribalism, we can talk about all sorts of things. That's not what's going on now. It may come later. But what is happening now is a government that is illegal, who has a court ruling that gives them no rule and has to comply. If we can get over that hurdle, my dear Dr. Hines and Mr. Shuman and our audience, there is room then for plenty talk.
All right, let's keep moving on. Time is killing us now. So, Dr. Hines?
My answer to Gail's question, why is the government perplexed about this voters list now? The answer to that is the same reason why your party is excited about this list. Right?
No, we're not.
Let me finish.
We're willing to just go with it.
I will give all of you a chance to make a closing statement.
But both of you all looked at that list. Your party see that you could win with that list. The other ones see that they perhaps could lose with that list, and that is election petition. And you all are clouding it in all kind of legal this and legal that. It comes down to that. You look at the list, you say the PPP could win with this list. The other side look at the list and they say we can't win with this list. And that's where we are. I may have let the cat out of the bag because we are going around in circles all the time. And this is about the mother of all elections, this one that is coming up, all right? Who will get to oversee this billions of dollars that will be coming? Who lose get to play no part in overseeing that. Those are the two issues that are before us. And all the other talk is fluff.
Okay, Mr. Shuman?
You
listen to the question. The question basically is that we can get these youngsters on the list, unlike what Mr. Granger is saying, but also you can also rebut the two comments made by Mr. Teixeira and Dr. Hines. And then after that, we have a poll coming up, and then we'll ask you guys to make a closing statement because it's 4 o'clock on Sunday, June 23rd.
Sis, I really wish we had a lot more time because I'm enjoying this discussion.
Come again.
But here's the thing, right? I have always said it, and we've said it right out of the gate, that at the end of the day, the rule of law has to reign supreme in this country, whether we like it or not. If the law says that this is what it is, and the court or the courts have ruled on it, then that is what it is. In terms of the list, I have stated my position already on that, but I wanted to get 2 points across, right? In terms of constitutional reform, there has been an absolute unwillingness on both parties to drive that. And Dr. Hines, or I think Mr. Teixeira asked the question, who is going to bell the cat? And give me 2 seconds here. I think the Liberty and Justice Party will be the party to bell that cat when we get into Parliament. Right? But here is also a little bit of essence.
But did the AFC say that? Did the AFC say that before? Did the AFC say that before, Mr. Shuman?
Well, we know where the AFC is. I mean, I think we're going to sing some hymns to them later today. But here is something, right? We have a political party in power who just a few weeks ago came out with this fantastic poll that gave President Granger, 94% rating, said that Prime Minister Nagamutu is favored to be the next prime ministerial candidate. Now, if you have the kind of confidence in the research that is driving your party, then what is there to fear? You might as well walk out of the
94% of the nation, 94% of their supporters. Not 94% of the nation. I think he got 34 or 34%.
Dr. Hines, they provided the numbers. I can simply quote what they would have provided, right? Yeah. But if you have that kind of confidence in what your research is showing you, put your research to the test. There's no reason to run and hide. If you think that what you would have done as a government is to look out for the people and progress and all these things, put it to the test. At the end of the electorate that will have to decide on they put their trust in to lead this nation, or if we're going to end up in a minority government, or if we'll end up in the Liberty and Justice Party majority.
So I want to take this opportunity to thank Globespan 24x7 for bringing this to us live via their internet platform in New York City, technically supported from Mumbai, India. We have a poll, and I want to ask the technician, Mr. Devin, please announce the poll results. Thank you. And then we will go to closing statements. So we're coming to an end pretty fast. So Devin, whenever you're ready, just sign on.
Yes, we have asked our online audience 2 questions. The first question that we polled them on is, should elections be called in 90 days? 80% said yes, 20% said no. The second question was, should GCOM be allowed to complete its house-to-house registration within 90 days? 29% said yes, and 71% said no. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. So ladies before gents, so I will start with Comrade Gail Teixeira.
As I said in the beginning of the program, that the people of our country are faced with a choice. And that's going to be the choice in the elections. And the more the government holds out, the more the people of this country will stand up for democracy. And that is that the question, the choice that people have, put aside government, put aside parties. People have a choice in this country now between, do they support a government that is willing to flaunt the Constitution, thumb their nose at the Constitution, or will they vote for democracy, and whichever choice they want, a political party. That's going to be the choice of the people. The cost of living is high. Young people, job creation is at an all-time low. You talk about oil and gas. The issue is that the agreements have been bad that have been developed by this country, by this government, for the people. So this whole thing that the PNC is peddling, and I'm shocked to hear Mr. Hines peddle it too, that we're all there, this is a battle over oil and gas. It's not a battle over oil and gas. The issue is first and foremost a democracy and our right. The no-confidence motion is a fundamental principle of parliamentary democracy in democratic societies. This NCM, the no-confidence motion, has put Guyana constitution to the test. It has withstood the test. It has withstood 3 courts. It has withstood the legislature. It is now time for the government and the president to obey the Constitution. We have the issue of once election date and there's election campaign on, the issue of the political positions of each party on how they're going to resolve the problems of Ghana, the economy, social, the ethnic insecurities, because the ethnic insecurities are all one side, not on one side only. And so the issue of that will come next. But right now, this moment is that the government has to comply with the Constitution. Otherwise, the next program, if you ever invite me back on it, or other people, we will be discussing Guyana once again, coming out of the fold of a democratic fold globally and becoming a pariah state. Again, an authoritarian state that we were known for in 1970s and 80s. That's where we're heading. And I'm hoping that sense, wisdom, and as Shuman said, and I support him on this, if government is so confident that it could win, then, and if I were in their situation, have an election as quickly as possible. Catch the government, the political parties off guard. Go call elections in 1 month's time, 2 months' time. Go, if you're so confident. That's what responsible, accountable government is about. You're accountable to the people who elected you. You're accountable to the parliament. And when you've lost the confidence of parliament, you have to go back to the people for the power. But you've lost. And the people either put you back or they throw you out. And that's fundamentals of democracy. When we come next, if the president doesn't name a date, doesn't get rid of Mr. Patterson, doesn't call for us to meet and talk about the chairman, who's going to be the chairman from the list, we're in a different ballgame. And that the discussions will go into some of those issues, I'm sure. But we got to deal with the here and now right now, and we're at a critical junction.
Thank you very much. 404 to 408, 4 minutes of speaking by Comrade Teixeira. Dr. Hines, your 4 minutes is up. Let's hear you.
Like Comrade Gail, I am tired. I've been in this thing from the time I was in short pants.
Ah, yes.
From the 1964 fight to the present, I'm tired of Guyana always on the edge, always on the edge and risking ethnic explosions. I'm tired of that. And I think we have got to address, for me, that is the overriding question. I hear all the talk about complying with the Constitution. I hear all of those things, and I think they're valid. But I think the overriding question is holding this fragile nation together. And I'm tired of us always being on the edge. So for me, this moment is about avoiding that, avoiding another explosion. And it is coming if we do not handle this moment creatively. And so therefore, I would argue that rushing an election in this stipulated timeline, we run the risk of doing more harm to the nation than if we were to come to some compromise where we give and take on both sides, so that both sides go into these elections not feeling as though they were cheated, that they agree to something, some kind of consensus that we can say both sides have agreed to. If we go into an election with one side feeling aggrieved and the other side feeling triumphant, then we are risking danger. So I'm appealing to the audience to pressure your leaders on both sides to let common sense prevail and let us get past all of this talk, all of this, these hardline positions that we are holding on to, and let us think about saving this nation again from exploding. Because every time we explode, it gets worse. We are here because we exploded a few years ago, and we didn't really try to do something to prevent it from happening again. Here is another opportunity to prevent once and for all an explosion that is this time I am predicting is going to be worse than the last time. Let our leaders come to a compromise position so that both sides, all sides, can come out of this feeling that we have made a decision together and we will honor it.
All right. Finally, Mr. Comrade Shuman, I may say.
I get to a comrade status by the end of a discussion.
See,
maybe after another one, I'll get to a different status. But sis, I want to implore our leaders, and I say our leaders because at the end of the day, they still lead a significant amount of the population, to demonstrate that kind of leadership that the nation needs. Demonstrate the kind of stewardship of your parties to ensure that there is dialogue that addresses the issues. The Constitution makes room for both sides of the divide to sit down and have a discussion and determine a further date forward if it is not acceptable. And it is time for that dialogue or time exploration of that dialogue and what it is in the past 90 days. I recognize that the Constitution says 90 days, but the Constitution also says, or until such time that both sides can agree to an extension. So we have to look at this with political maturity. We have to satisfy a process of the appointment of the GCOM chair, and after that, we have to come to a mutually agreed upon time as to how long we can extend this time, within which the president has a responsibility to the nation to proclaim an elections date. It does not rest with anyone else except the president. GCOM cannot dictate to the president what to do. The president has to say, this is the date. The Constitution says that GCOM has to be ready for elections at minimum 90 days. And those are some of the things that we have to look at. At the end of the day, the rule of law, once again, has to rule supreme in this nation. I have to disagree to a certain extent because this next election, it is going to be the mother of all elections, but it is not only about a single component, it is about a second one. It is about the protection and enhancement of our democracy, and potentially seeing the government going, or the country going down a path that becomes unrecoverable because of the tremendous amount of oil wealth that this country will have. So it is actually two prongs that we have to look at the stewardship of this nation and whose hands we are going to be putting it in. And I say hands because those are plural. What I want to also do is to implore all of our viewers, all of our listeners, all the political parties, that at some point, this discussion that we are having on this panel needs to be taken to a higher level. And I would invite them to seek their leadership's participation in a debate on the issue. Don't just come and vote blind because someone fills your head with some propaganda. I would encourage them, and I'd encourage the leaders to come and let's have a meaningful debate on the issues. There's no reason to hide behind anyone or hide behind anything or any office. Come and let's have that debate at the University of Guyana or any venue that you choose. I'm inviting Mr. Ali and Mr. Granger to come and let's have that debate on the issues. And then after that, let the chips fall where they do.
Thank you very much. So the challenge has been put out that there should be a presidential candidate debate, and that will happen during the hopefully during the campaign. But bringing this to a close, I want to thank Globespan 24x7 and Mr. Nohar Singh for providing this platform. I want to also welcome all of you three back. There will be place for you on this program because this is a trend-setting program, and we want the trendsetters on it. And all three of you have done fantastically well today in bringing out the issues. Big issues I've heard today: principles must be married to practicality, was said by one of the judges. Comrade Gail Teixeira said good faith effort. She's calling for good faith effort. She's calling for maturity, and she's calling for us all to follow the Constitution. Dr. Hines said he's tired, but he lives in a real Guyana, and he wants compromise. He wants the leaders to talk and come to a political solution. And Mr. Lennox Shuman said the rule of law must be supreme. And even though this will be the mother of all elections, he is calling on the political leadership to explore all opportunities and listen to each other and debate on the issues very shortly. On that note, I want to thank you very much. Thank you, listeners, for signing on. Thank you, Globespan, for providing the platform. And thank you, the in-house audience in Richmond Hill, for making it, leaving your home and coming across. Thank you very much, all. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Hines, thank you.
Thank you.